Terry and I resumed right where we left off, as if no time had passed and I were still as beautiful as I was before the fall. He took care of me on the road. So did Frank. At every place we ate in Europe, Frank would make sure I ate well. He told me I had to gain some weight and get healthy again. He was very concerned. Uncle Frank looking out for me. Frank asked me, "What do you like to eat? What are your favorite foods?" I said, "I like shrimp and cookies." Frank laughed and said, "Okay, well, that's on the menu." We got off the train in Germany. We went across the street from the station to the finest hotel. We stayed in the best hotels in the world when we were with Frank, top of the line. The hotel in Germany smelled amazing. There were books on the wall from floor to ceiling. Frank said to the waiter, "Now listen, I wanted to ask you if you have some shrimp and cookies, because my friend here fell 40 feet out of a window, and I need to make sure she eats right, and she likes shrimp and cookies." The waiter did everything in his power to make them appear. Cookies were easy to come by in Europe. The most amazing desserts were everywhere. But shrimp? That was a task. Somehow, even in the most remote and landlocked places, Frank asked for shrimp and cookies, and they magically appeared on every dinner table through the whole tour of Europe. Terry and I would always sit across from Frank, or right next to him. We would scooch up close so we could tell him jokes and make him laugh, keep him happy on the road. When we got to Rome, Frank reminded me of the deal we had made back in Boston. Terry, Patrick, and I were to walk up the stairs to the top of St. Peter's Basilica, home of the Sistine Chapel. He told me, "I want you to go all the way up there and look down." If we did that, it would prove to Frank that I was no longer afraid of heights anymore. My reward was Frank would fill out the papers needed to arrange for us to meet my Pope. Of course, we agreed. What I didn't know in advance was in order to walk up to the top, you have to go up this teeny tiny staircase comprised of 551 steps. You had to go up single file, one step at a time. It was claustrophobic and exhausting, but I climbed step by step. It was brutal. I did it because Frank told me to. When I finally got the top, I felt the wind blowing hard on my face. I heard the cooing of the birds who were roosted there. I looked below at St. Peter's Square at the tourists below, and I wasn't scared anymore. When we got back to the hotel, worn out from our adventure, Frank was there to greet us. "Well, did she do it?" Terry and Patrick told him I did it. Climbed all the way to the top above the Sistine Chapel. Frank smiled and clapped his hands. "All right, you're in. Tomorrow, you go to the Vatican." We got to go. We saw all the popes there entombed, hermetically sealed and cryogenically frozen in clear glass caskets, frozen in crisp air. I visited the resting place of my uncle of the 7th generation there. He looked at peace. When we went back to the hotel later that day, the first question Frank asked Terry was if I looked like the Pope. Terry said, "Oh yeah, she looked just like him." My name, Consalvi, carried so much weight in Rome. Everywhere we went, when the people heard my name, they would mutter, "She's a Consalvi. Oh, a Consalvi." I was treated like royalty. We ate the most amazing pasta while in Rome. Frank joked he should change his name to Consalvi. I cherished my moments with Frank to tears. He meant the world to me then. And even as an adult at age 65, he still means the world to me now. That part of my life is so poignant because I was making important decisions about my future. I am blown away when I think back on the cherished and beautiful friendship I had with him. I really had to be careful, though, and delicate because he had his beautiful wife, Gail. She was eccentric and unique and protective of Frank. I never wanted to tread on that. Frank was a night owl. After the shows ended, he and the band were always searching for a place to eat and have conversation. We were in Amsterdam and everything was closed, which made sense since it was so late. Somehow, Frank got word of a guy who was willing to open his restaurant for us at 2 a.m. The chef, who was also the restaurant owner, was a huge fan of Frank's. Zappa was his king. That guy served us, the entire band, a 5-course meal of the finest foods. After the most amazing food, the chef brought out dessert on silver domed trays. First, there was a pile of cookies and pastries, perfect for me. The second silver tray was brought directly to Frank. Once the cover was removed, the dessert was revealed. It was a joint, a blunt. Not just any joint, but the largest joint I had ever seen, rolled to perfection. It must have been at least 6 inches long. The cook said, "Frank, I made this special for you. Enjoy." What the cook didn't know was Frank didn't do drugs, but Frank had always taught us the first rule of eating in a restaurant: never insult the cook. If someone went to great lengths to prepare something for you, you had to try it. Frank paused for a moment as the chef lit the joint, and then Frank said, "Hand it to her first," indicating me. I took a giant drag. Then Frank took a tiny puff of smoke in his mouth and spit it right out. He did not inhale. Then the joint went around the table. Even guys in the band who normally didn't smoke weed took a hit. They had to, not to be rude. We all ate and talked and laughed until 5 a.m. I used to stand at the soundboard every night on that European tour and watch those guys play for an hour and a half with so much love and care in their playing. They made sure it was perfect for Frank. Terry Bozzio would sing one part every night. I just stared at him like I was watching God. He played the part of the devil in the song. No one can play the devil like Terry fucking Bozzio. Nobody in the whole world. I would critique his devil. He is an innate genius, easily the greatest drummer in the world. And Frank knew it. I was never afraid of Frank and loved him dearly like I loved my own father. He never made me feel uncomfortable, never did anything inappropriate, never even the thought of it. Frank protected and taught me. One time I was agitated in the studio because I had been waiting around for hours waiting to do my part. Frank told me, "If you can't take the downtime, get out now." I looked at Frank and thought to myself, what the fuck is downtime? I truly didn't know. I would ask Terry everything I needed to know. Problem solved. After the tour, I came back to LA with Terry. We got our first real apartment together. I ended up suing Holiday Inn after I recovered. They gave me $10,000. They claimed they didn't know who the people were that I saw in the lobby. They didn't have a security guard that worked at the hotel who fit the description my cousin and I gave them of the man who burst into the room and chased me out the window. There was no record of him. He and his distinctive face still haunt me. Years later, when I looked at photos of the Hillside Stranglers, I realized they looked just like the 2 white guys I saw that day. After all these things happened, I did my research. They were conning and raping girls. The Hillside Stranglers were found to have lived no more than 6 blocks from the hotel. I am convinced to this day that those were the Hillside Stranglers. I got away. One of them is still alive, rotting in prison. I've always wanted to see him and say, "It's okay. I lived. My heart and soul have been raped by those 3 men, and they didn't even touch me that way." Every day I wake up and see their laughing faces. I look over my shoulder and can't sleep in the dark. There was another time in the studio with Frank when I got invited to record on the track I Don't Want to Get Drafted. Terry was doing his drum tracks. The first thing that goes down is the drum track. I was living with Terry, so I went wherever Terry went. I was not working, but Frank had me on the payroll. Frank asked, "You want to sing today? Do I want to sing?" Yeah, Frank, I said. He told me to go into the vocal booth and sing the chorus. He sang me the section, I don't want to get drafted. Wars are really ugly. They're dirty and they're cold. I don't want nobody to shoot me in the foxhole. He sang it to me in a falsetto voice, and he got high-pitched when he sang the word foxhole. I was laughing because he sang it so high. I went into the vocal booth and sang the part. Frank said, "Okay, that was good, but can you sing it up an octave?" In my mind, I went, "Oh no, what's an octave?" I didn't have any musical training. I was just a kid and I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, "What did you say? Up an octave?" Frank looked at me and asked, "Do you know what an octave is?" I had to admit I didn't know. There was dead silence. He motioned like he was driving an ice pick into his forehead. That's what he would do. When something would go wrong, Frank would put his hand to his forehead and say, "Ice pick in the forehead." In my head, I was freaking out, knowing I caused Frank to do the ice pick in the forehead thing. He saw me freaking out and assured me it was okay. He told me, "It's all right. Go home tonight and learn what an octave is. Then you come back tomorrow and sing that up an octave. Okay?" Okay. I felt so hurt and crushed. I was defeated. I walked down the hall of the studio, and there was Thomas Nordegg, who worked for Frank, sitting there passing the time. He was leaning on his hand like the famous Rodin sculpture, The Thinker. I asked him, "Thomas, what is an octave?" He said, "An octave is do then higher. Do. Octave, problem solved." Another time in the orbit of Zappa's universe, Terry and I went out to dinner with Frank and the legendary writer William S. Burroughs. He is best remembered for his trippy book, Naked Lunch. We had dinner with him, not lunch, and everyone was fully clothed. After the meal, we went outside to get in our cars, and Burroughs pisses on the fire hydrant right there in clear view of the cars running down Sunset Boulevard. I asked Terry, "Are all of Frank Zappa's friends like this?" Terry, Warren, and I were a united front. With them, I learned how to share, how to get a tuna sub and split it up 3 ways. One Halloween, Terry and I stopped by the Zappa house. I came up with a brilliant idea. I said to Frank and Gail and Terry and the kids, "I know what we should do. Let's go trick-or-treating." Frank rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, that's a great idea." I told them, "Moon and Dweezil will want to go. We should do it." Eventually, everyone agreed to go, and Gail was driving. Gail always drove the black Rolls-Royce with the license plate that read YOMOMMA. We all jumped in the car. Frank was the last one to agree. He stood on the driveway looking at all of us piled in the Rolls and finally gave in. He said, "Okay." We drove along the side of Mulholland Boulevard, stopping and trick-or-treating with the kids at a couple houses. For the first stops, Frank sat in the car. After we hit a few more houses, I said to Frank, "Come on, Frank, come trick-or-treat with us." He gave in and said, "I'll come and maybe get a Milky Way." We rang the doorbell of this house, and a woman opens the door. In unison, me, Terry, Dweezil, and Moon say, "Trick or treat." Then a second later, Frank says, "Trick or treat." The woman just stares at us, especially at Frank. The lady said, "What?" She was dumbfounded. She wasn't sure it was truly Frank Zappa because it was Halloween. Maybe it was a tall kid dressed like Frank Zappa. And we ran back to the car like little kids. Frank got his Milky Way. Gail watched the whole thing and was laughing at us. That was one of the only times I saw Gail really laughing hard. Gail was the most down-to-earth person with her messy hair and bare feet, but always serious. Not that night. We all laughed and laughed as we hit a few more houses. Not Frank. One was enough. He sat in the car and ate his Milky Way. One of the greatest moments in my life had to be my return to Boston's Playboy Club years after I worked there. This time I brought my guests with me: Terry Bozzio, Patrick O'Hearn, Eddie Jobson, and Frank Zappa. We walked through the front door with those guys in tow. I didn't have a membership, but I was a former Playboy bunny there, so I figured it would be cool. The Playboy key girl said, "I can't let you in since you're not a member. That's the rule." She says this to me like I don't know the rules, like I hadn't worked there years before she did. I looked at her and said, "Really? You go get the boss up there. Tell Stephen Chin Dale Consalvi is here." She went up to his office and he came down to welcome me with open arms. Stephen then escorted us to the big table, the best one in the place, secured in the special VIP room. Everyone in the club was excited. All the bunnies wanted to come over and meet Frank. But the rule was you could not leave your section as a bunny. You could not just go over to tables unless they were assigned to you. You could not deviate. I could see every eye in the place watching our table. We hung out most of the night. As we were walking out, I took Frank by the hand and told him to come with me. I specially walked him by all the bunnies and introduced my hero to all my old friends and former co-workers. I took him by the bar and then I took him upstairs to meet all the girls there. We went downstairs to meet Bunny Lenny. She was the cool pool table bunny by the jukebox to shake hands with Bunny Casey. I dragged Frank around every inch of that club, a real circle line tour of the place. He smiled and said hello to all the bunnies, charmed them. Frank could be so charming and romantic to people he met for just a moment, all with no intent. He was such a star and he didn't act it. It was like he wasn't even aware. He was so humble, down to earth. I walked him through there and he was a hero to everyone, like the biggest star they had ever seen. People were just in awe of Frank Zappa. For me, it was a magical moment. Dale from Medford, who everyone in the club knew as Bunny Tony, was back in town from her worldwide adventures. It was a sort of homecoming, and I was not alone. I had brought one of the biggest rock stars of all time with me. He was there. He was my friend. It was like Elvis came to town, and I got to be the girl who is co-starring with the king. But in this screenplay in my head, Frank was the king. And this was in real life. The other girls couldn't believe it. I'm sure some of them were even jealous. Terry Bozzio asked me to marry him. I said yes, partly because Frank thought we belonged together. He was always saying that Terry was the guy for me. And I listened to Frank. Neither one of us should have been married. The idea of a marriage suggests settling down. We were not at that point. We had music in common. It was the bond that brought us together. So I said yes. Yes, I'll be the Bozzio bride. We were married in Boston because I wanted to be surrounded by my family. My father and mother were long divorced, but in their old age, they were civil to each other. Mom had remarried Frank, my stepfather. My brother Brian was out of jail. He was free of the bars, but still damaged from the past. It was my family, together. I oversaw setting up all the details because Terry was on tour in Europe with the band UK. The menu, the flowers, the guest list. I was always good about working through the details then. I picked the fanciest hotel I could find to host our little gathering. Everything was set and ready to go. Nothing could mess up my wedding day, except maybe a massive fire at the last minute. Terry was scheduled to fly in at 8 a.m. on our wedding day, March 10th, 1979. I had made reservations at the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston, 6 a.m. On the day we were to be married, I got the call that the hotel was on fire. I had all my family scheduled to stay there. Terry's car was to bring him to the hotel straight from the airport, So at the very last minute, we had to move the wedding to the Hyatt in Cambridge, Massachusetts, overlooking the Charles River. Our wedding was a sweet and intimate ceremony, just my family and a handful of friends. The food and champagne were perfect. My parents even got along. No small feat after all the years of animosity. We were so young, too young perhaps, but Terry loved me, and Frank said we should be together. I still had doubts about the marriage working. After all, the only role models I had in that department were my parents, not exactly the symbol of wedded bliss. The very next day, Terry left to fly to Japan and went back on tour with UK. We had the wedding, and he left less than 24 hours later, back to the music. I went back to LA and got a bigger apartment in the same apartment building we had already lived in. Warren still lived downstairs. Dougie was still right down the hall. Terry came back from Japan, and that's when we put the band together.